Okay, here on the record with the people versus D'Angelo Lamar Jordan, calling case B 8066791. For the evidentiary hearing, this is a continuation from almost 2 weeks ago. Here.
City Rogers for the people, P82072, alongside co-counsel.
Matthew Rosenthal for the people, P84807.
And for the defense, Dennis Whitey, P79560. On behalf of Mr. D'Angelo Jordan, Your Honor, he's appearing by way of Zoom today, and that was per his request. He did not want an in-person hearing, although I wanted to be here for the hearing. Mr. Jordan, can you please state your full name?
D'Angelo Lamar Jordan.
And if I could, Your Honor, just remind my client, Mr. Jordan, if you need to speak to me at all, go ahead and send me a text at the same phone number, okay?
Yes, sir.
And if we need to take a break for a call, we can do that too, okay?
No problem.
Okay. Thank you, Judge.
So we left off with Officer Malloy.
That's correct.
Okay. And kind of redirect.
Yes, that is correct. And the officer is present in the hallway and he'll be present in the courtroom.
Okay, let me make sure we have used this wall. Everything's good? Okay.
Oh, and just so the court's aware, I do have another witness. So there's
Okay.
2 in total. And
Right.
she's also in the
Officer
hallway.
Honeycutt, right?
Honeycutt, yes.
Okay. All right, so when you're ready, you can bring in Officer Malloy.
Good afternoon, officer. If you could please state your name and badge number for the record again.
Officer Jason Malloy, badge 2641 for the police department.
Thank you, officer. And to continue as best we can from where we were 2 weeks ago, now on redirect, going back to field sobriety test, I believe that you testified, or I believe defense asked if you could do field sobriety in the field area that was adjacent to where the traffic stop was conducted. Is that correct?
You did ask that, yes.
Okay. And can you describe what that field looked like?
It was at nighttime, so honestly, I can't describe what it looked like. But I know at the point of the traffic stop, we were past the field,
Okay.
so I didn't go back into the field.
I see. So you were past, and isn't it correct to call it a field? Is that what it was?
I believe, from the pictures, I believe so.
Okay. So you were past this open field area?
Yeah.
So how far past do you think you were? If you can recall.
Maybe a car length and a half.
Okay. So would you have not gone back to the field because you already passed it? Is that just something you wouldn't do?
That's correct, yeah.
And why wouldn't you do that?
Not really where to walk, we don't go up on the freeway, or the area right there, or on the road right there. And, we want to get as much as we can on video and our dash cam to get the catch that.
I see, okay. Say you were in line with this field open area. Is a field, a grass area, somewhere where you typically conduct field sobriety tests?
No.
And why wouldn't you typically do that?
There could be holes in the ground, could be uneven ground, it's not very even area to conduct the field.
Okay. Do you typically conduct them on cement, something level?
Yes,
And do you recall if this field area had any lights?
No.
So you couldn't see in the field area?
Pause for one moment. Come back in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
I can proceed, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So going back to the lighting of this area, was it lit?
No.
would you typically perform field sobriety in a dark area? And why would you typically not do that?
You can't see, if there is any hazards for him to step in or anything like that, and you gotta see him as best as possible and put movement and everything.
Okay, so I mean, it's crucial to be able to see how the defendant's performing the test.
Correct.
Okay, and so of course you're in your scout car that has headlights and everything. Could you point your headlights and then conduct the field sobriety test?
Not in the field, no. And at that point, like I said, we're past it, we're not gonna go the wrong way of traffic.
Okay, and could it potentially change the results of the field sobriety test if you had your headlights pointing at it and your lights on and everything?
It depends what part of the test I get.
Okay, what part of the test could it change?
The eyes, the horizontal phase and segments.
And you mean change, it would affect the outcome?
It could affect his vision and development.
And were there any additional safety reasons why you would not conduct the field sobriety in this field?
Other than it being uneven and not being able to see where he's stepping and everything like that. No.
And was there anywhere else where you were performing this traffic stop that you could have done field sobriety test?
No.
And is this your common practice if there's nowhere safe to conduct field sobriety tests that you don't do the field sobriety test?
If it's not safe for us or the person we're
Going back also to what defense counsel was questioning on the 98 different clues that can be seen in a traffic stop for an OWI arrest. Are you familiar with those different clues?
some of them, yes.
And there's 98, that's correct?
So,
Okay, I believe so too. Have you ever seen all 98 present at one time in one arrest and one defendant? Would it be possible to have all 98 present?
to my knowledge,
And would it not be possible to have all 98 present because some conflict with each other?
that's correct.
Okay. But did you see any visible signs of intoxication in the defendant on the night in question?
From the start of it, he was driving. He had a delayed reaction time when he was coming up to the light. When you're intoxicated, it can affect your range. There's a car in front of him that he almost struck, which caught our eye. The speed, from what we could see, he was going above the speed limit coming up to a red light at a very high speed. Swerving the lane, but not being able to maintain a lane.
Okay. And that was all before you stopped him. The driving could indicate.
We stopped, yes.
And then once you stopped, did you see any visible signs of intoxication, like odor or anything like that?
From the start, he, we were able to maintain following the directions that we gave him. Keep his hands on the steering wheel. He did part of the reason he did ask him to step out of the vehicle. And then once my partner asked him to step out, I walked around to the other side and,
And the failure to follow officer commands, that's a sign, that can be an indicator of intoxication. And excess speed when driving can be an indicator of intoxication. Swerving in lanes, can that be an indicator of intoxication? Almost causing a vehicle crash, can that be an indicator of intoxication? And then the odor of intoxicants on the breath, is that an indicator of intoxication? Okay. After all, so, I'm sorry, 1 second, please. So due to everything you saw, is that what led you to arrest?
Yes.
And once you determine someone you believe is intoxicated while operating, what do you typically do at that point?
Once we determine that we are arrested or come to arrest them, we just put them in handcuffs, put them back in our car, and then order the area and just do an inventory search of the vehicle.
Was there anything else about this incident that you believe is memorable?
He did have a firearm on him at that time.
Nothing further.
Okay, again, my name is Dennis Whitey. We spoke 2 weeks ago by Zoom, your testimony. Just a few things to clarify the redirect testimony. I think you said the part of the reason that you would not move back to a field to do any field sobriety tests is because the video would not catch it. Is that correct?
That could be a factor, yeah.
Okay. And in this case, didn't you have a body camera on?
We did.
And a body camera is worn on your uniform, is that correct?
That was correct.
And with the body camera being worn, that body camera goes wherever you point it, isn't that right?
That's correct.
And when you do field sobriety testing, the subject stands in front of you, isn't that right?
Or, yes.
Okay. And so then the body camera could have recorded all the footage or events as they were happening, isn't that right?
That's correct.
So actually having a camera being a factor that really wasn't the biggest factor here, was it?
That was the biggest one.
Okay. And again, your body camera was on, right?
That's correct.
And you don't have that video recording or footage for us today, correct?
That is correct.
And I'm not saying it's through any fault of you. I know, just to clarify, the Detroit Police Department requires that evidence be destroyed after 90 days. Isn't that right?
At that time, yes.
Okay. Did it change?
As of right now, after all the protests, it did, but
Okay.
it wasn't before the protests, it was 90 days.
Okay. Thank you. I learned something new today. Okay. The next thing was regarding you would not want to do field sobriety tests in a field. Wasn't there a sidewalk nearby?
That was, I mean, from the pictures, yes, but at that time, it was,
Oh, you didn't really notice.
it was dark.
Okay. Did you look around for any area for pavement where you could safely conduct these field sobriety tests?
At that point, where we were at, was very unsafe area.
Okay. Now, you stated that you would not conduct field sobriety testing where it was not lighted well. Is that right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, you just said potentially, but
Where we can't see where he's stepping and stuff like that, yeah.
okay. Have you conducted field sobriety tests at night before?
Yeah.
On how many cases have you done that?
Maybe around 10.
Now, there was an issue the prosecutor asked about with lighting. You have flashlights on you, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And there's headlights, correct, on the scout car?
Yeah.
There's street lights there, isn't there?
I'm not sure. I believe so.
Okay. Well, let me move on from that then. He stated the reason you wouldn't want to use headlights to illuminate in areas because it may affect the horizontal gaze nystagmus test. Is that correct?
All of the words, good, yeah.
Okay. And how long ago were you trained in the standardized field sobriety testing curriculum?
2 years ago? Okay, maybe a year, yeah.
And in that curriculum, didn't they teach you it's not the headlights, but it's the flashing or rotating overhead lights that cause the problem with nystagmus?
I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. So you don't know actually, correct?
Yeah.
Now, let me ask, it looks like from your report, Scout Car 680, is that correct?
That is correct.
In 680 is a car or a unit assigned to the 6th precinct, correct?
Yeah.
And at Davison and Gallagher, that's the 11th precinct, isn't that right?
Yeah.
And that you were there because you were heading back from the Detroit, correct?
The next-
Detention center, okay. And so you're not familiar with that area, correct?
That's correct.
And on direct exam 2 weeks ago, you stated you did not know the speed limit on those streets, correct?
That is correct.
But yet today you testified he was exceeding the speed limit. Is that right?
I said, I thought he was going over the, approaching that light.
Okay.
High rate of speed approaching that light.
Okay, so you think he was speeding, but you don't know the exact speed
That's
limit.
correct.
Okay. Did you ever go back to check what the speed limit is after the fact? At any point? Have you gone to Detroit Detention Center after the date in question?
Yeah.
And you use those same roads, correct?
Not the road that we've seen him approaching.
Okay. Nonetheless, though, you didn't actually go out of your way to check what the speed limit would be, correct? Now, you're a Detroit police officer. You've been out there at least 2 years, right? Okay. And you agree with me that people in the city drive pretty poorly at times, correct?
Yeah.
People fail to signal, correct?
Yeah.
They ride the bumper in front of them, right?
Objection, this is not relevant in speculation, talking about all the people in the city of Detroit, how they drive.
Not all the, that's not all the people. I said a lot of people drive that way. It's based on his experience. It's a foundational question, Judge.
I will allow it. I don't think we should say
No, I didn't say that.
anymore.
I was careful not to say that because I drive this. Okay, so, but you see a lot of cars with excess speed, correct?
Yeah.
And especially McNichols and Davison area, they hot rod pretty good, don't they? A lot of times.
I believe so.
Okay. And some people swerve, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've seen close calls with almost vehicle crashes, correct?
Yeah.
And from all of those, does that necessarily indicate because somebody's driving poorly or recklessly, I guess, if we term it that way, that doesn't mean they're drunk, correct?
Not 100%, no.
A lot of sober people in the city, and in any area, any city, drive pretty poorly even when they haven't been drinking, correct?
Yeah.
Now, the prosecutor painstakingly went through what you actually observed in this stop to establish probable cause. I want to ask something along those lines, okay?
Okay.
Okay. And so, from the things that you saw, those could indicate somebody may have been drinking, but not necessarily, correct?
Correct.
And one good preliminary sobriety test, I guess, to show it's due to the consumption of alcohol is by requiring that driver to submit to a preliminary breath test. Isn't that right?
Okay. Okay.
Sure. So, because people drive poorly,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily indicate alcohol. The one sure way that an officer can really tell if it's their poor driving is due to the consumption of alcohol is to require them to do a preliminary breath test. Isn't that right?
Correct.
Or SFSTs. And I'm glad you said that. And in this case, well, we went over SFSTs. Those weren't done for safety reasons, okay?
What is,
Correct? Oh, standardized field sobriety testing. Sorry about that. I get in that window too.
that's fine.
And so those weren't done for safety reasons. But there was no safety reason not to have Mr. Jordan submit to a preliminary breath test. Isn't that right?
Correct.
You can actually do those in the backseat of a car, correct?
Correct.
Somebody can be handcuffed and you can actually have them submit to that test, correct?
Correct.
All while that subject and the officers are safe, you can conduct that one sobriety test to determine if alcohol is a factor for the poor driving. Is that correct?
That's good.
And in this case, I know you stated you were not trained in preliminary breath tests, correct?
Correct.
Is your partner, Officer Honeycutt?
I don't do the same.
Okay. But you never called for a trained officer who could administer that test, is that correct? So you admit that more could have been done to really determine if the poor driving was due to the consumption of liquor, correct? Okay. And I appreciate that. Thank you. Nothing further.
Yes, just very briefly. Regarding the PBD test, do you have to do a PBD test in order to create or establish probable cause?
We don't have.
And is there anything you are trained to, that you have to do in order to establish probable cause? No. And the reason there's nothing on, are you saying that you can establish probable cause through totality of the circumstances? And what does totality of the circumstances mean?
Everything that happened from the beginning was watching him to the end, and taking that into consideration.
Okay. And And is that what you did in this situation?
Yeah.
And is that what you do in a typical OWI arrest?
Take everything that we have available, yes.
Nothing further.
Nothing, Judge.
Wonderful.
Figure that make you happy.
All right, Officer Marie, you are good to go. Thank you for coming in, it was much better.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
One moment.
We're in the bathroom.
All right, I'll have her call you when she's back.
Thank you.
People count officers, okay? Thank you. Good afternoon, officer. Good afternoon. Can you please say your name and badge number for the record?
Police Officer Daniel Honeycutt, badge 87.
Thank you. And how are you employed?
I'm employed at the 6th Precinct for the Detroit Police Department after 2-3.
Okay. And do you have any training or experience to be able to be part of the Detroit Police Department?
We did 6 months of the academy at the Detroit Metropolitan Training Center.
And what are your duties as a police officer?
My duties mainly as a police officer is patrol and answering police runs, making traffic stops, ensuring the safety and liability of
And were you on duty March 11th, 2020?
I was.
And were you at the area of East Davidson and Gallagher?
I was.
What brought you to that area?
We had just done a traffic stop and OWI arrest prior. The Detroit Detention Center is over on Davidson and Mount. We were on our way back from the Detroit Detention Center to our precinct.
Okay. So you were leaving the Detroit Detention Center?
Yes.
And when you were leaving the Detroit Detention Center, what did you see?
Saw a vehicle that had slowed reaction times, almost hitting a car in front of him at a red light. The car went in front of us. I continued to follow as it could not stay in between the lines of the road. I initiated a traffic stop.
Were you driving the scout car?
I was driving.
And what happened once you started the traffic stop?
Once I started the traffic stop, the driver rolled down the window. I could smell intoxicants on his breath when he was speaking to me. He could not follow simple commands. He stated to me he was a CPL holder and he had his gun on him. When I asked him where it was and he placed his hand on the steering wheel, he could not do so. He could not follow it.
Okay. To bring you back a little bit, so when you approached the vehicle, could you smell the intoxicants from the vehicle or from the defendant's breath?
From the defendant's breath, I was talking directly to him.
Okay. And when did you notice the smell of intoxicants?
I noticed it almost immediately. It was much worse when I had to step out of the car once he told me that the gun was in the car.
And how did you know it was intoxicants?
Just from my training and experience as an officer.
And what kind of commands were you giving the defendant?
To put his hands on the steering wheel. Originally, I asked for his ID and registration for the car. Then he informed me that there was a gun in the car, so I had him place his hands on the steering wheel for all of our safety, and he could not follow it. He kept moving them, reaching for things.
Okay. And is that standard practice for you to ask the defendant or the person in the car to place their hands on the steering wheel after they say they have a weapon?
Absolutely. It's for everyone's safety.
And what was he doing with his hands instead of placing them on the wheel?
He was reaching for items. can't tell you what he was reaching for.
Okay. And when he was disregarding officer commands, what did you do from there?
I had him place his hands on the top of his head and interlock his fingers, and then I grabbed his hands with my left hand and had him step out of the car.
Okay. So would you say you helped him out of the car? Was he able to get out of the car by himself?
I can't speak for that. I got this person out of the car the same way I get everybody out of the car. I grabbed their hands and helped them out of the car facing away from me.
Is that your standard practice to always do that?
Yes.
And why is that?
It's for everybody's safety. I have control of the situation. He can't turn around and run. He can't turn around and hit me. He or she. Anybody.
Okay. Once he got out of the car, what happened from there?
I placed him in the handcuffs, informed him that he was being detained for suspicion of OWI, and I placed him in the back of the scout car. I retrieved the gun from the floorboard of his car.
Okay. And did you perform field sobriety tests?
I did not.
And are you field sobriety trained?
I am.
And why didn't you perform field sobriety in this stop?
The location of the stop, right on Davidson, is where Davidson turns into the expressway. It is a very high-speed area. There was not room to do the stop, and it was also very early in the morning.
Okay. Very early in the morning, meaning was it still dark out or was it light out?
It was dark out.
Okay. And then, so this was a busy area of the road?
Yes.
Okay. And if you're in a busy area of the road and it's dark out and there's no lighting, do you typically perform field sobriety tests?
It all depends on the situation. I can't give a typical answer for that. It depends on where we're at, what's happening, the totality of the circumstances.
Okay. So based on the totality of the circumstances, you did not think it was safe to perform field sobriety tests?
I did not.
And is this a safety concern for both you and the defendant, the civilian?
More so for the defendant. I suspect him of being under the influence. He's going to have slow reaction times to somebody who is not under the influence.
Okay. And did you notice slower reaction time to them?
I did. The very first thing that drew attention to the car to make the stop was his slow reaction times on hitting the brake.
Okay. And that factored into, his slow reaction time factored into why you stopped him?
Correct.
And, were you able to give him a PBT?
No, I am not PBT trained, and neither was my partner.
And if you're not PBT trained, can you still, give a PBT test to someone?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. So that's why you didn't do that?
Correct.
Okay. Are you taught in the academy or through work that you have to do field sobriety tests or a PBT to establish probable cause in an OWI run?
No, I've been taught that I can establish probable cause with the cues that I have seen. The slurred speech, the delayed reaction time, the odor of intoxicants, not following commands. As long as you have those aspects of somebody under the influence, you do not have to do SFST or arrest on suspicion. Not everybody is SFST trained.
Okay. And you can still, you're trained that you can still, arrest someone for an OWI offense without being field sobriety trained.
Correct, you're arresting on suspicion.
And here, how did you establish suspicion?
His slow reaction times with almost striking the car, not being able to stay in between the lines of the roadway, the odor of intoxicants, and not being able to follow safety commands.
The slow reaction time when he's driving, can that indicate intoxication essentially?
Yes,
And, you just said that he could not maintain the lanes, when he was driving?
Yeah.
And failure to maintain the lanes, can that indicate intoxication?
yes,
And, almost getting in a collision, can that indicate intoxication?
yes,
And can the smell of intoxicants on the person's breath indicate intoxication?
yes,
Can failure to, listen to officer commands indicate intoxication?
yes,
So based on the totality of the circumstances, is that why you arrested?
yes.
Was there anything else that was memorable about this incident to you?
Just that his gun was on his floorboard instead of in a holster or in a compartment. It was just sitting on the floorboard.
Is that not a typical place where people keep their guns?
Objection, speculation as to where typically people keep guns.
So have reframed it for Officer Knight, based on her experience.
Yes, I will rephrase. Thank you, Judge. Based on your experience, is that where you typically, or that, based on your experience, you typically see guns on floorboards?
No, most of the time they're not in the
One
open.
second, Judge. Nothing further.
Crossman, you want to take a moment to consult your client?
No, I'm good. We just clarified that. Now, from your testimony, first, let me start officially. I'm Dennis Whitey. I'm the defense attorney for Mr. Jordan, who's present by Zoom. I'm going to clarify a few questions that the prosecutor asked you, okay? Okay, now to start, this sounds like this was a pretty dangerous situation that you were, I guess, addressing. Is that correct?
All traffic stops are inherently dangerous.
Of course, and especially if somebody's driving poorly or recklessly, that could enhance the danger, correct?
Correct.
And if somebody is driving so poorly or with such recklessness, that's somebody you want to stop, correct?
Correct.
Because you're trying to protect the other members of the public, isn't that right?
Correct.
How far from the point where you saw Mr. Jordan's vehicle to the time you stopped his vehicle, what was that distance?
I don't know. I typically work on the west side. I couldn't tell you.
Okay, fair enough. And that's car 680 is a 6th precinct car, correct? And that's the 11th precinct where Gallagher and Davison's at, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
As a matter of fact, I reviewed the radio tapes from that night. Didn't you actually call Detroit Communications that night asking which precincts or district you were in?
I don't recall.
Okay.
It's possible.
Okay. Needless to say, you were out of your area, unfamiliar.
Correct.
Okay. Judges, give me one moment. And I should back up. I should have asked you. I ask all officers when I start, so I apologize. There was an incident report completed, correct?
Correct, Officer Malloy did it.
Oh, your partner did it, correct?
Correct.
Did you read that report?
Not until court.
Not until court today.
Not today,
Okay.
when the original subpoena came out,
Okay.
2 weeks ago.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. And so, before he submitted this report, did you review it?
I did not.
Okay. After you reviewed it, is there anything that Officer Malloy left out or had inaccurate?
Can I see it again?
Sure, absolutely. Judge, may I approach?
Sure.
And this is just to give every officer the opportunity to correct anything, because I know how it is sometimes.
In my opinion, it looks like a good report.
Okay, may I approach, sir? Thank you. And you agree with me, your memory was better, closer to the incident than it is today, correct?
Correct.
And you testified earlier that you immediately smelled alcohol upon approaching the car, is that right?
Correct.
And that's not reflected in this report, correct?
He can't write a report based off my findings.
Correct.
Or hearsay.
No, understand that. So, no, completely understand that. But you guys didn't discuss the report or anything prior to him submitting this, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Would you say you and your partner didn't communicate too well, I guess, that night regarding after the incident or not?
No, I had faith in my partner's ability to write a report, and with it not being a felony charge, I did not write my own report.
Okay, gotcha. If it's a felony, each officer writes their own report, is that correct?
They're supposed to, not everybody follows the rules.
Understand, I know. I've seen a lot of reports. Okay, so getting back to the original location, I believe was McNichols, also known as 6 Mile, and Davidson's where you originally saw this vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And I was going to ask you if this sounds about right. Your Honor, I'm showing the prosecutor a Google Maps, I guess, citation or directions from the point of the traffic stop to the point where the officers reportedly originally found that. Can I present that to the officer? I don't necessarily need to admit this, I don't think. Let me just ask, is it about 1 mile to stop, 1 mile from when you originally saw Mr. Jordan to when you stopped the vehicle?
Probably.
Okay. And you didn't stop him right away when you saw some of these behaviors, correct?
As soon as I saw him not being able to stay in between the lines is when I made the stop. I didn't stop off the one cue.
Okay.
I stopped off the second cue.
Okay, understand. And that took about 1 mile down the road to get to, that's when you lit it?
Correct.
Okay. So for that entire mile, these weren't a conglomerate of bad driving for about 1 mile. It was, you watched them and these things all kind of happened at once, correct? Okay, so the prosecutor asked a lot about what you had saw. And I'm going to ask you, does this necessarily, in your training experience, indicate that somebody must be intoxicated if you see this, okay? So if you see somebody who's slow driving, does that necessarily indicate that they're intoxicated? From your training experience?
Not all of the time.
Okay.
The way you said it originally, you said must.
Okay.
It must, it doesn't have to, but it
Correct.
is.
No, and I'm glad you picked up on it, yeah. It's not a full-gone conclusion that somebody's driving slow, they must be drunk, correct? Okay, and same thing with failing to maintain lanes, correct?
Correct.
Same thing with almost causing a collision, correct?
Correct.
And failing to listen to officers' directions. People aren't always intoxicated when they're failing your directions, correct?
Correct.
Some people don't follow your directions because they're just being difficult, I think, correct? Okay. And even the smell of intoxicants on somebody doesn't necessarily mean that they're intoxicated, correct?
Correct.
For instance, I could drink a beer right now in front of us, and you might smell the alcohol, but I'm definitely not going to be the point of, at least I hope not, to the point of unlawful blood alcohol limit for driving purposes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the one sobriety test that could have really sealed the deal, that could have showed why or indicated while the poor driving was related to alcohol would be a preliminary breath test, isn't that right?
Yes,
Okay. And a preliminary breath test is a roadside test, correct?
correct, but the department's not, they don't pay for us to get trained for that, nor do they supply us with the PPTs. We have to go to our own training and supply our own PPT.
Okay, let me back up. That's something very new to me. The Detroit Police Department does not supply preliminary breath tests to the officers.
No.
Officers must purchase their own preliminary breath tests.
Yes,
Are those preliminary breath tests at all calibrated by the city of Detroit?
I don't know, I don't have one.
Okay. Are you aware if any records are kept as to maintenance on these machines?
I do not know.
Okay. And that includes even the traffic units, is that right?
That, I'm not traffic, I'm
Okay.
patrol. So
Understand.
I do know that we have to purchase our own 2400, or the captain of the night at one point came to one of our accident scenes
Okay.
and stated he was going to get PBTs for our precinct.
Okay.
I have yet to see them.
Okay.
So,
And I understand, I fully understand. Okay, so, but there are officers on the street that have a preliminary breath test, is that correct?
correct.
Okay. And there are officers that would assist you potentially in administering preliminary breath tests, correct?
Potentially, if there's one working, yes.
Okay. Just give me one moment. Now, you agree with me with the standardized field sobriety testing, there's a total of like 98 indicators or clues that somebody's drinking and driving, correct?
There's a lot.
And you saw about 5 to 6 of them, correct?
Yes.
So out of the 98, you had about 5 or 6, which led you to believe that Mr. Jordan was intoxicated to arrest, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And can I ask what you did? Well, I understand your testimony that when you were following Mr. Jordan, you saw the driving, you stopped him based on his driving, correct?
Correct.
And just so you're aware, and the court's aware, we don't challenge the validity of the stop. You know, there's probable cause of reasonable suspicion for the standard. What did you do after the stop to either confirm or disprove your suspicion that he was operating while intoxicated?
Well, I had him at the stop. I informed him that he was detained for suspicion of OWI and asked him if he would agree to go to the DDC for the data master test by a data master trained officer.
Okay, understand. But other than that, nothing prior to arresting him, did you do or were able to do, correct?
Besides the cues of the intoxicants on the breath and the not following basic commands.
Okay. Failure to follow basic commands, intoxicants on breath, led you to believe there's not probable cause to place him under arrest, correct?
In addition to the driving.
With the driving, of course.
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'm not going to painstakingly go through 98 of those clues. We did that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The court was very aware, so I'm just letting you know that's why 7 out of 98, that's where I'm not going to, okay? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you. Looking at the 98 clues that you potentially could see if someone is operating while intoxicated, have you ever seen all 98 present at once?
No.
Would it be possible to see all 98 present at once?
I don't think so, since one of them is asleep behind the wheel. You can't be asleep behind the wheel and ignoring your words.
I agree. I think that makes sense. Is there so many clues because intoxication can present itself very differently in different people?
I would believe so.
Okay? And you did see clues here.
I did.
Okay? And I'm sorry, did you testify that you saw 7 clues here?
I didn't say 7. He threw that one out there.
I see.
He said about 5 to 6 and then corrected it to 7 later, I believe is how that.
You saw more than one clue.
Correct.
Okay. And going back to on cross, that bad driving doesn't mean someone's intoxicated.
Correct.
And failure to follow commands doesn't mean someone's intoxicated.
Correct.
And even the smell of intoxicants, as defense said, doesn't mean intoxication.
Correct.
But what if all of those are coupled together? Does that mean, or could that indicate intoxication?
It does indicate it, yes.
And do you have to look at all three together to determine the totality of the circumstances?
Yes.
Is that why you don't look at just one thing at a time to determine if there's probable cause here?
Correct.
And you testified that you were not in your precinct when you made the stop.
Correct.
Do you make stops not in your precinct? Does that happen?
It does happen. I work for the entire city of Detroit. I have jurisdiction in the entire city of Detroit.
Okay. So just because you weren't in your precinct, it doesn't mean you did your arrest any differently.
Correct.
One second. Nothing further.
Just briefly, you indicated on direct and redirect, you testified about several clues. You also testified that you were returning from the Detroit Detention Center because you just arrested somebody else for OWI, is that correct?
Correct.
Was that arrest, did that take place at night?
It did.
Okay, and did you do any field sobriety tests on that arrest?
Objection, this is not relevant. We're talking about a whole different arrest at this point now.
I think it is relevant as to procedure, credibility, consistency, bias. I think
And
that's
it muddies-
always relevant.
It muddies the waters also that we're talking about a different arrest the same night, but not this defendant in question.
Judge, I'm just asking if she conducted field sobriety tests. That's the only question I have with regard to that.
I think it's not relevant to go into facts, because I agree with Attorney White that it may lead to credibility, whether or not she's truthful as to whether or not she does this with other stops. Nevertheless, to get to that credibility, you have to go to the facts, circumstances of the whole case, to differentiate the difference, or to tell the difference between Mr. Jordan's case and what we stopped. So I'm going to
Okay, fair enough. And I'm not challenging her credibility as if being untruthful. On your procedure that you follow, do you try to follow a consistent procedure with regard to investigating operating while intoxicated cases?
In regards to the totality of the circumstances, yes, what the circumstances, what dictates how I conduct the stop.
Correct. And have you conducted field sobriety tests at night on any stop?
I have.
Okay. Has your partner, to your knowledge?
I don't normally work with him. I was at overtime.
Oh, okay. That's a mess. Okay, thank you. Nothing further.
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. Everybody good? Thank you. Stay safe out there. Thank you. And I believe no more witnesses, correct?
Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was the last witness from the people.
Do you want to speak to your client before?
Yeah, just before argument, if I could give him a call.
Sure, I'm going to put on mute, Mr. Jordan on mute, and report on mute.
Okay. We give him a call real quick. And then Judge, just so we're clear, you want us to just orally argue the issues, not submit any written briefs? I mean, I'm willing to orally argue right now and just, that's fine.
That's what
Up to you all.
I prefer just to orally argue. Okay.
Let's get it done. Okay. I just want to make sure you didn't do it otherwise. Okay.
Perfect.
Gordon, okay? Okay.